Hello, I'm your State Senator Rob Wonderling, and welcome to this month's edition of Community Report, where for the next several minutes we'll meet the fine folks at the Heritage Conservancy and our stick here at Penn-Buck Farm. Now, I've got my umbrella out because indeed April showers are upon us, but that's okay because we intend to spend the next several minutes learning how the Heritage Conservancy works with a private landowner to preserve open space, the next several minutes we'll meet the fine folks at the Heritage Conservancy and our stick here at Penn-Buck Farm. Now, I've got my umbrella out because indeed April showers are upon us, but that's okay because we intend to spend the next several minutes learning how the Heritage Conservancy works with a private landowner to preserve open space, preserve a working farm, and ultimately enhance our environment. We're now standing inside one of the structures at Penn-Buck Farm, and I'm delighted to be joined by Gene Sirni, who is Vice President for Advancement and Communications for the Heritage Conservancy. And Gene, we're really glad that you and your team can spend some time with us today here at Penn-Buck Farm. First of all, for our viewers, a little bit about your background. How did you first get involved in the conservation movement and end up at the Heritage Conservancy?
Well, my career has been in the nonprofit field for the past 25 years. I had a long career in the United Way system. And then my spouse had a chance to go back to law school at Syracuse. And we had known a lot of couples that have done, New York, D.C., and try to see each other on weekends and grow apart. And so we made the commitment to go together. And I was Vice President for Advancement and Communications also for a community college in Syracuse. And really never understood the place that community colleges have in America until I did that. To watch our brand of students grow and become more self-confident was really rewarding. And then Philadelphia law firm came up, did an on-campus interview, like my wife, invited her down. I became a trailing spouse at that point. And I wanted to sort of cast my net out a bit more broadly, and conservation had always appealed to me. And Heritage Conservancy really tries to take a very practical approach to conservation. That also appealed to me. And it's been a great 7 years.
Well, we're glad you're in Pennsylvania, and hopefully 7 will turn into many, many more years. Let's talk a little bit about the Heritage Conservancy, in particular for viewers who are not familiar. First of all, the Heritage Conservancy sets the gold standard for conservation, and you use the word practical approaches. So perhaps just a little bit of background on the Heritage Conservancy, your membership, the kind of things you work on, and then particularly what has happened here.
Sure. The Heritage Conservancy is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. We were formed in 1958, and probably the early days of the Conservancy, it's fair to say that we were reacting to some of the growth that was happening in Lower Bucks County, some of the rapid growth. And there were probably some town fathers and some visionary folks that got together early on and felt it was really time to put together an organization that focused on conserving our natural areas, our open space, our working agricultural landscapes, and our historic properties. So we're really proud of our 50th anniversary this year. One of the programs that we'd like to talk about is called Lasting Landscapes.
Yeah, let's talk about that because I know that is the practical approach to the mission of the Heritage Conservancy.
Yeah. Lasting Landscapes was formed and developed by the Conservancy about 10 years ago, and it integrates planning, resource protection, and stewardship. And what that means is our planners will identify geographic areas that have high concentrations of conservation values and map those areas in an effort to work with municipalities and landowners so folks know the working agricultural landscapes that are in their areas. Municipalities will understand what should be preserved and what should be built upon. And it's been a really successful program for 10 years now.
Well, and I think the success is also rooted in your philosophical approach that first is rooted in science and sound planning, and that is so critically important, I think, particularly when we talk about being proper stewards of our natural resources. And second, it's a private-public partnership, and you engage private landowners in a way that isn't confrontational, that makes sense, and is rooted in the facts. Now, of course, Pennsylvania is a commonwealth. We have over 3,000 local governments, and therefore working locally is probably more important than, say, chumming on a state senator out in Harrisburg from time to time, which the chumming happens from time to time, but that's okay. So why don't you provide some examples, particularly here in the Upper Bucks region, where the practical approach has been successful?
Sure. I think it's fair to say that municipalities will say to us that we can't do the work alone. You know, it's very difficult for municipalities to have the funding, to have the staffing, to actually go out, identify the areas that they want to preserve, and identify those areas that are better for the built environment. So they, as you pointed out, partner with local organizations, conservation organizations like us, and we're an extension of them, and in that partnership, we're able to access municipal funds, state dollars, county dollars, and really put together financing packages for conservation work like we're doing on this farm.
Well, and it's important, too, for our viewers and to remind you that it's your approval of bond issues that have allowed those of us that serve in the General Assembly to direct resources for conservation efforts. And you may have heard of Growing Greener 1, Growing Greener 2. I've personally been active and supportive of both initiatives, and in fact recently worked to create a lower threshold from which land could go into farmland preservation from 50 to 35 acres. But these are public resources matched with private resources at the state and local level that result in better conservation methods, better planning. Let me ask you the question everybody always asks me: how difficult is it to get several municipalities to work together, particularly when we're talking about, say, preserving a watershed?
Always a challenge, but it's getting better. I think
what's changing? Why do you think it's getting better?
Well, I think there's a consciousness in municipalities today that there are borders and there are boundaries, but natural areas, working agricultural landscapes, forested areas really span those boundaries and really have no boundaries, if you will. And I think there's an increasing recognition on the part of municipalities that they need to work together, and in working together, they not only are able to preserve those areas that are most important to them, but they're able to do it on a broader landscape level.
And a broader landscape level is increasingly becoming, if you want to measure it, say, by a watershed area, it could be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 municipalities that touch a particular watershed. Obviously, a watershed is also driven by the geological conditions, and that drives what type of use should be used for the land. And then there's a whole host of other planning mechanisms. As you look in your crystal ball and think about the future for not just the next 7 years in your service to our community, but even further out, what do you see, first from our perspective, the barriers that will need to be removed so this continues to happen in a more easier fashion, and where do you see the opportunities?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the bond referendums, the ones that you referenced, the one that was just passed in Bucks County and the one that was passed not long ago in Montgomery County, is a real force for change, because in those bond referendums they look to municipalities to review their open space plans, to review their comp plans, and that in effect, that process begins to drive municipalities to work together. So I think it's the bond referendums that are the largest opportunity for us, and to the extent that that can happen at the state level, that will be helpful as well.
Well, here we are in April of 2008, and interest rates keep declining, which means it's a good time to borrow money, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector. And I know in Harrisburg we will be talking about what is the proverbial sweet spot for increased borrowing. I'm a firm believer that if the citizens would like us to agree to legislation that allows for more borrowing in the name of the environment, in the name of conservation, and it's the right thing to do. We are entrusted, in fact, have a constitutional obligation to be stewards of our environment, and I think if we're going to continue to take advantage of borrowing in the future and know that those resources are managed, those financial resources, by outstanding organizations like the Heritage Conservancy and by you, Gene, will be in great hands. And I really just want to thank you and applaud you for your service in our community.
Thanks so much.
Sure. Thank you.